They did not invite us. They summoned us. There is a difference. And every single person aboard the Resolute understood it the moment the orders came through. I was in the middle of a live fire drill when my console lit up with a priority channel from High Command. Not a request. Not a suggestion. A direct order stamped with Admiral Henry Ashworth's personal encryption key, which meant someone very high up the chain had decided that Commander Sophie Grant, Weapons Systems Officer aboard the United Earth Naval ship Resolute, was about to have a very bad week. I read the orders twice because the first time I thought I was misunderstanding them. The Galactic Council of 12, the oldest and most powerful governing body in known space, had formally demanded that humanity provide a live fire demonstration of its military capabilities. They called it a request. They wrapped it in diplomatic language, so polite it could have been a wedding invitation. But the subtext was loud enough to hear from across the galaxy. Prove yourselves. Show us what you have, and we will decide if you matter. I set down my coffee and looked at Ethan Blake, my executive officer, who was already reading the same message from his own terminal. His face told me everything. This was not an exercise. This was not a routine evaluation. This was a test designed by species that had been traveling between stars for tens of thousands of years, and they were pointing that test directly at a civilization that had only been in space for 214 years. Us. They want a show, Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. They want a measurement, I corrected him. They want to know exactly how dangerous we are so they can decide how much they can push us around. That was the truth of it. Humanity had petitioned for a council seat 7 times. 7 times we had been politely, carefully, and thoroughly rejected. We were too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable. The elder species, the ones who had been building empires while humans were still figuring out bronze tools, looked at us the way a grown adult looks at a child holding a sharp object. Nervous, slightly annoyed, and absolutely certain that we would eventually hurt ourselves. The worst part was that some of them were not entirely wrong. We had a reputation, and it was not for patience or diplomacy. It was for the Kreth border war, where a single human carrier group had taken apart a pirate armada 3 times its size in less than 6 hours. The galaxy had noticed that. They had noticed it very much. And now, instead of offering us a seat at the table, they wanted to see exactly what kind of weapons we had brought to the dinner party. Admiral Ashworth's briefing came through an hour later on a secure channel. I sat in my quarters and listened to his voice, calm and measured as always, while he explained what was expected. You were not chosen because you are the highest-ranking officer, Sophie. You were chosen because you are the steadiest. 7 internal marksmanship records, 3 combat tours, and you have never once lost your composure under pressure. He paused. Your orders are as follows. Show them enough to earn respect. Do not show them enough to provoke fear. This is a diplomatic exercise, not a war. Am I clear? Crystal clear, sir, I said. Good. And Sophie, do not start something we cannot finish. I ended the call and sat there in the quiet of my quarters for a long time. I understood the Admiral's logic. I understood the politics. Humanity needed allies, not enemies. We needed the Council to see us as responsible partners, not as a threat that needed to be contained. And the best way to do that was to perform well enough to impress them, but modestly enough that they did not feel threatened. The problem was that I had spent my entire career being told to hold back. Every exercise, every demonstration, every joint operation with allied species, the orders were always the same. Do not show them everything. Do not push too hard. Do not scare them. And every time, I watched the elder species look at us with the same polite condescension, the same gentle dismissal, as if we were performing a trick they had already seen 1,000 times before. I was tired of holding back. But orders were orders, and I was a professional. So I pulled up the specifications for the demonstration, studied the testing protocols, and began planning our approach. 5 tests: accuracy, yield, rate of engagement, defensive countermeasures, adaptive targeting. Each one scored against historical records set by the 12 over millennia. Standard stuff. Clinical, impersonal, designed to rank species on a scale that the elder civilizations had built to keep themselves at the top. I called a briefing with my senior staff that evening. The wardroom of the Resolute was small but functional, and I gathered the people I trusted most. Ethan Blake, steady and thoughtful, who always saw the angles I missed. Katie Marsh, my lead fire control technician, who could strip and rebuild a targeting array blindfolded. Daniel Frost, our helmsman, who flew the Resolute like it was an extension of his own body. And Nora Beckett, our communications officer, who had the sharpest ears and the quickest mind I had ever encountered. I told them the situation. I told them the orders. I told them what the Admiral expected. And then I paused. "Those are the orders," I said, "and I will follow them." I looked at each of them in turn. Katie, who had lost a cousin in the Kreth War. Daniel, who had been denied promotion twice because humanity's military was always being downsized to appease council sensitivities. Nora, who had spent 3 years as a diplomatic liaison and had come back with a quiet, burning resentment for the way alien diplomats talked about our species when they thought no one was listening. "I will follow them," I said again, right up until the moment I decide not to. Nobody said a word, but I could see it in their eyes. Something sharp and bright, like a flame catching. Ethan logged the briefing, word for word, because that was the kind of officer he was. Thorough, careful. He knew that if things went sideways, the record would matter. That night, I sat on my bunk and took out the one personal item I always carried with me. A sidearm, an old model pistol. Not a service weapon, but a replica my grandfather had carried. It did not connect to any targeting system. It did not have smart rounds or adaptive sights. It was just steel and springs, the kind of weapon that humans had been perfecting for centuries before they ever looked up at the stars and thought about reaching them. My grandfather had carried it through the Kreth War. He had been an engineer, not a fighter. But when the pirates boarded his transport, he had picked up this gun and stood in front of a bulkhead door for 11 minutes, until reinforcements arrived. He never talked about those 11 minutes, but he kept the gun, and when he died, he left it to me. I held it in my hands and felt the weight of it. Simple, direct, honest. That was what humans were. We were not elegant, we were not ancient. We were not wise in the way that species with 10,000 years of civilization were wise. But we were honest about what we were. And what we were was stubborn, resourceful, and very, very good at the one thing that every species in the galaxy pretended they had moved beyond. We were good at fighting, not because we loved it, but because we had spent our entire history getting good at the things that kept us alive. The next morning, the Resolute jumped to faster-than-light travel, heading for the Thelene neutral expanse, where the demonstration would take place. It would take us 3 days to arrive, 3 days to prepare, 3 days to get ready for the most important weapons test in human history. I spent those 3 days going over every system on the ship, running diagnostics, drilling my fire control team until they could execute targeting sequences in their sleep. Katie Marsh ran the railgun calibrations 4 times because I asked her to, and then ran them a 5th time because she wanted to. Daniel Frost practiced evasive maneuvers in the simulator until his reaction times were faster than anything I had ever seen from a human pilot. Nora Beckett spent her time studying the communication protocols of every species that would be present, so that she could read the room in real time during the demonstration. And Ethan Blake walked beside me through all of it, steady and quiet, keeping the crew focused while I sharpened the blade. On the second night, he came to my quarters. "You are not planning to hold back, are you?" he asked. I did not answer right away. Then I said, "I am planning to follow orders." He looked at me for a long moment. "And if the orders stop making sense? Then I will make a judgment call." He nodded slowly. "Just make sure the judgment is worth the consequences." He left, and I sat alone with the stars outside my viewport, thinking about what it meant to be the representative of an entire species. 8 billion people back on Earth. Millions more on colonies and stations and ships scattered across our small corner of the galaxy. All of them watching, whether they knew it or not. All of them counting on me to get this right. I cleaned my grandfather's gun one more time, I checked the Resolute's weapons systems one more time. And then I went to sleep. Because a weapons officer who does not sleep before a fight is a weapons officer who makes mistakes. I did not intend to make mistakes. The Thelene neutral expanse was the kind of place that made you feel very small and very temporary. A dead star system, deliberately emptied of habitable worlds thousands of years ago, and converted into a military proving ground by the Council. No planets, no stations. Just a shattered gas giant hanging in the void like a broken fist, surrounded by a ring of observation platforms and scoring arrays. This was where species came to prove what they could do with a gun, and the scars on the asteroids told you that a lot of species had done exactly that over a very long time. We dropped out of faster-than-light travel on the edge of the system, and the first thing I saw on my tactical display made my stomach tighten. Ships. Hundreds of them. The Valori had brought a ceremonial war fleet of 40 vessels, each one 3 times the size of the Resolute. They hung in perfect formation like a wall of polished metal, their hulls catching the light of the distant stars. The Valori were the oldest of the 12, the founders of the Council, and they wanted everyone to remember that. Their ships were not just weapons, they were statements. The Dreth Collective had sent their flagship, a living bioship that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic glow like a heartbeat. It was twice as long as any Valori vessel, and it moved like something alive, which it was. The Dreth did not build their ships. They grew them. The Ul-Shani had brought a diplomatic cruiser, elegant and understated, its hull covered in patterns that shifted like light on water. The Grenshi had sent a hive carrier, bristling with smaller craft. The Thelen had sent an observation sphere that looked like a giant glass eye, and on, species after species, each one with their flags and their fleets, each one here to watch humanity be measured and judged. And there we were. 1 Valor-class heavy cruiser and 2 escort frigates. That was our delegation. That was all we had brought. They brought their biggest toys, I said to Ethan, who was standing beside me on the bridge, to remind us we are small. We are small, he said quietly. That is not the same as being weak. I liked Ethan for a lot of reasons, but I liked him most for moments like that. The opening ceremony was held on the central observation platform, a massive structure that floated in the shadow of the ruined gas giant. Delegations from all 12 elder species were present, along with representatives from the 2 other petitioning species who were also here to demonstrate. The Grenshi, an insectoid hive species with compound eyes and clicking mandibles, and the Ulvani, towering crystalline beings who moved with a slow, deliberate grace that made everything around them look rushed. The senior arbiter of the proceedings was a Valori High Chancellor named Sovreth Kael Thon. He was tall, even by Valori standards, with silver-white skin and eyes like polished copper. His voice was deep and perfectly modulated, and when he spoke, every species in the room turned to listen. That was the Valori gift, authority so natural that it felt like gravity. We welcome the petitioning species to the Thelene Proving Grounds, Sovreth said, his words translated in real time through a dozen different language systems. The demonstrations you provide today will be evaluated according to protocols established by the Council of 12 over 4,000 years of continuous assessment. You will be scored across 5 categories: accuracy, yield, rate of engagement, defensive countermeasures, and adaptive targeting. Your scores will be measured against the historical records set by the 12, and your performance will inform the Council's deliberations regarding your petition for elevated status. He paused, and his copper eyes moved across the human delegation. I was standing near the back, in my dress uniform, trying to look calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. We encourage all participants to demonstrate their capabilities fully and honestly, he added, and I caught something in his tone that I did not like, a kind of gentle emphasis on the word fully, as if he were reminding us that there was a ceiling and we were expected to stay well beneath it. The demonstrations began with the Grenshi. They performed adequately, their weapons precise but not exceptional. Their hive-mind coordination gave them an advantage in multi-target engagement, but their weapons lacked the raw power to score well in the yield category. They finished with respectable numbers, and the Council applauded politely, and the Grenchi delegation seemed satisfied with their showing. The Olvani went next. Their energy weapons were beautiful. There was no other word for it. Streams of focused light that carved through targets with surgical precision, leaving clean cuts and minimal debris. Their accuracy scores were excellent. Their yield was moderate but controlled. They performed well, and the council applauded with noticeably more enthusiasm. I watched both demonstrations carefully, not because I was worried about the competition, but because I was studying the scoring system. I watched the numbers populate on the displays, and I did the math in my head, and I realized something that made my pulse quicken. The records were old. Some of them had been set centuries ago, during the Valori imperial peak, when they had been the undisputed military power in the galaxy. And in the hundreds of years since, nobody had seriously challenged those records. Not because they could not be broken, but because nobody had dared to try. The testing protocols, the scoring thresholds, the entire system was built on the assumption that the 12 were the best, and that everyone else was playing for second place. But the records themselves were not unreachable. They were beatable. I could see the numbers. I could feel it in my bones. During a recess between demonstrations, I stepped out onto a quiet observation gallery to collect my thoughts. The view was spectacular, the broken gas giant filling half the sky, its rings of debris glittering like a frozen river. I was alone, or so I thought, until a voice spoke from behind me. "Commander Grant." I turned. A small figure stood in the shadow of a support column. An Ul Shani, her skin shifting through shades of pale blue, her eyes large and dark, and filled with an intelligence that made me feel like she was reading my thoughts. "My name is Tessara," she said. "I am a junior diplomatic envoy with the Ul Shani Concord. I wanted to speak with you privately." "About what?" I asked. She stepped closer. "About what you are walking into. The Council does not want you to succeed, Commander. The tests are structured so that younger species score well enough to feel validated, but never well enough to threaten the hierarchy of the 12. The acceptable range is mediocrity. If you exceed it, there will be consequences." I studied her for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the Ul Shani remember what it was like to be the youngest species at this table. That was 4,000 years ago, and we have never forgotten the way they looked at us. The way they look at you now." She paused. "I am telling you because I believe humanity deserves an honest chance, and the Council is not offering one." "What kind of consequences?" I asked. She did not answer directly. Instead, she said, "Be careful, Commander, and be aware that you are being watched more closely than you know." Then she was gone, moving through the shadows with a quiet grace that made no sound at all. I stood there for a while, looking at the stars, thinking about what she had said, thinking about mediocrity, thinking about all the times humanity had been told to be less than what it was. When I walked back to the staging area, I found my team already gearing up. Katie was running last-minute calibrations on her portable console. Daniel was reviewing approach vectors. Nora was monitoring every diplomatic channel simultaneously, her eyes flicking between 6 screens. Ethan was waiting for me. "We are up next," he said. "I know. The Admiral's orders still stand?" "They do." He looked at me. I looked back. "For now," I added. He did not say anything else. He just fell into step beside me, and together we walked toward the transport shuttle that would take us back to the Resolute, back to the firing line, back to the place where humanity was about to be measured against the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. I sat down at the primary weapons console, the same console I had been sitting at for 3 years, the same console where I had set 7 internal records and fought in 3 combat engagements, and spent more hours than I could count learning every system, every frequency, every angle that this ship could give me. I flexed my fingers. I took one slow breath. The arena lights shifted. A tone sounded across every frequency, broadcast to every ship in the expanse. It was our turn. Every alien eye, sensor, and psionic receptor in the system focused on the Resolute. The small, angular, supposedly primitive human warship, sitting in the proving ground like a stone in a field of jewels. Katie looked at me from her station. Weapons hot, Commander. Daniel gripped his flight controls. Ready when you are. Nora pulled up every channel. The whole galaxy is watching. I touched the console. The familiar hum of power running through the ship vibrated in my fingertips. 3 years of training. 7 records. A grandfather who had stood in front of a door for 11 minutes because that was what needed to be done. Then let us give them something worth watching, I said. I activated the targeting array, and the Resolute came alive. The first test was accuracy, and it was designed to be straightforward. 200 stationary targets at varying ranges, from close combat distance out to extreme long range. Kinetic weapons only. Railguns, coil guns. The solid, reliable systems that every spacefaring species used as their foundation. The scoring was simple. Hits versus misses, and the time it took to clear the field. The current record was held by the Valori. 197 hits out of 200, completed in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That record was 311 years old. Nobody had come close. I settled into my chair and pulled the targeting data onto my main display. 200 targets. I could see them all, little points of light scattered across the proving ground like stars in a dark sky. Each one was a drone, armored just enough to require a solid hit, positioned at ranges that tested everything from snap shooting to precision marksmanship at distances where light itself takes a noticeable amount of time to travel. Magistrate, I said to the ship's tactical AI, feed me raw targeting data on the primary display. Overlay range markers and drift calculations. No pre-processed solutions. Confirmed, Commander. The AI responded in its flat, measured voice. Raw data on your display. Shall I run predictive targeting in parallel? Run it, but I will be making my own corrections. Katie looked at me from her station. Manual override on the corrections? At these ranges? At every range, I said. She did not argue. She had seen me shoot. The signal came. A single pulse of light from the scoring array, and the test was live. I fired. The Resolute's twin dorsal railguns spoke in alternating sequence, a rhythm I had drilled into the ship's fire control system myself. Left gun, right gun, left gun, right gun. Each shot was a tungsten slug accelerated to a fraction of light speed, and each slug crossed the distance to its target in less time than it took to blink. I worked through the close targets first, not because they were easy but because clearing them quickly would give me more time for the difficult long-range shots. The railguns hummed and cracked, and on my display, target after target blinked from active to destroyed. 50 targets down in the first 30 seconds. The gallery ships were tracking every shot. I could not see the alien observers, but I could feel their attention. Millions of sensors and eyes and minds all focused on the small human ship that was methodically destroying everything in front of it. 100 targets. 1 minute and 10 seconds. 0 misses. I shifted to the mid-range targets. These were harder. They were smaller, with irregular shapes designed to confuse targeting systems. The AI offered corrections, and I compared them to my own instincts. Most of the time, the AI was right, but twice, at awkward angles where the targeting algorithm could not account for subtle gravitational drift from the nearby debris field, I overrode the solution and adjusted manually. Both shots hit dead center. 150 targets, 2 minutes flat, 0 misses. Commander, Nora said quietly from her station. The Valori gallery ship just increased its sensor resolution on us by 300%. Good, I said without looking up. Let them see. The long-range targets were the real challenge. At extreme distance, even a railgun slug takes enough time to reach its target that you have to account for everything. Gravitational pull from nearby masses, electromagnetic interference, the slight wobble of your own ship's orientation. The AI calculated solutions, but at these ranges, the difference between a hit and a miss was measured in fractions of a degree so small that even the best computer could not guarantee perfection. That was where instinct mattered. That was where years of practice and thousands of hours at the console turned a good weapons officer into something more. I fired, adjusted, fired again. Each shot felt right in my hands before the sensors confirmed the hit. I was not thinking anymore. I was just doing. 197 targets. The Valori record. I did not pause. I did not celebrate. I kept firing. 198. 199. 200. All targets destroyed, magistrate announced. 0 misses. Time elapsed, 2 minutes and 31 seconds. The bridge was silent for a heartbeat. Then Katie whispered, 200. For 200. 40% faster than the record. I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My heart was not, which did not. The gallery went quiet. Not the polite quiet of restrained applause, but the deep, heavy quiet of people who had just seen something they were not prepared for. I waited for the next test. It came quickly. Yield. This was about raw destructive power, the ability to deliver maximum damage per unit of ordnance. The targets were shielded asteroid chunks, dense and heavily armored, designed to absorb enormous amounts of energy before breaking apart. Species were judged on how much destruction they could deliver with the fewest weapons. The Council expected us to use our standard ship-to-ship munitions. Instead, I authorized the deployment of Mark 9 hammer torpedoes, the Resolute's heavy anti-capital ship weapons. They were designed to crack the hulls of warships 10 times our size, and they had never been demonstrated outside of human military exercises. The first torpedo launched from the forward bay, with a sound that I felt in my chest. It crossed the distance to the target asteroid in a clean, bright arc, and struck the surface dead center. The asteroid was rated to withstand 3 direct hits from standard heavy ordnance, before structural failure. It shattered on the first impact. Not cracked, not fractured. Shattered, coming apart in an expanding cloud of dust and debris that lit up the sensors of every ship in the system. On the gallery ships, I imagined I could hear the silence deepen. But I was not finished. The yield test allowed for multiple demonstrations, and I intended to make a point that no one in the expanse would forget. I ordered a cluster launch. 8 Mark 10's torpedoes, programmed for synchronized detonation, targeted at a moon fragment that the Council had designated as the maximum difficulty target. 8 points of light streaked across the black, converging on the fragment from different angles, timing their impacts within microseconds of each other. The detonation was, and I do not use this word lightly, beautiful. 8 explosions merged into a single expanding sphere of force that consumed the moon fragment entirely. Where there had been a chunk of rock the size of a small city, there was now nothing but expanding dust and radiation. The yield readings spiked past the top of the display's expected maximum. The scoring system had to recalibrate in real time to accommodate numbers it had never been designed to display. From the gallery, a Dreth observer made a sound that the translator rendered as a sharp intake of breath. Given that the Dreth were a species that did not technically breathe, the fact that they had a vocalization for that particular emotion told me everything I needed to know. Katie caught my eye. "And those are the ones we are allowed to export," she murmured. I almost smiled. The third test was rate of engagement. This was the one I had been waiting for. 500 fast-moving drones, released simultaneously from launchers positioned around the proving ground. Species were scored on how many they could destroy within a fixed time window of 90 seconds. The current record was 471, held by the Valori for over 300 years. It was considered one of the most unassailable records in Council history. The Valori had set it using their full-spectrum energy weapon arrays, which were regarded as the finest multi-target engagement systems in the galaxy. I had a different approach. "Magistrate," I said, "network the Resolute's point defense grid with secondary batteries, and link in the weapons systems of both escort frigates. Full integration, single firing solution. That will require all 3 ships to surrender independent weapons control to your console commander," the AI said, confirming authorization. Ethan looked at me. "You want to run all 3 ships' weapons from one chair?" "I want to run them from one brain," I said. "Mine." He authorized it. The 2 escort frigates, the Steadfast and the Clarity, locked their weapons systems into the Resolute's network. For the duration of this test, every gun, Every point defense turret, every missile launcher on all 3 ships would fire according to my commands, coordinated through Magistrate's network into a single unified wall of destruction. The drones launched. 500 targets, moving fast, jinking randomly, designed to simulate a swarm assault. They came from every direction, and for a moment, the tactical display looked like a cloud of angry hornets descending on 3 very small ships. I opened fire. The Resolute's close-in weapons systems screamed to life, autocannons cycling at rates that turned individual shots into a continuous roar of metal. The escort frigates added their own point defense batteries. Pulse lasers lanced out from secondary turrets, each one precisely aimed, each one finding a target. Micro-missile swarms launched from shoulder pods on all 3 ships, tiny warheads that homed in on the drones with relentless precision. It was not a battle. It was a performance. Every weapon system worked in harmony, layered fields of fire that covered every approach vector, every angle, every blind spot. The drones flew into a wall of coordinated destruction, and they did not fly out the other side. I did not think about the individual targets. I thought about the pattern, the rhythm of it, the way the swarm moved and where the gaps were. And every time I found a gap, I closed it with fire. The display counted down. 400 drones destroyed, 450, 471. The Valori record, matched. I did not stop. I did not even slow down. 480, 495, 500. Every single drone. Not one survivor. The time window still had 9 seconds remaining. All targets destroyed, Magistrate said. 500 out of 500. Record exceeded by 29 units. Time remaining, 9 seconds. On the bridge, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel Frost, who never showed emotion, who flew the ship with the calm detachment of a man who considered excitement to be inefficient, looked at me and said, "That was the single most ridiculous thing I have ever seen." I would have laughed, but the adrenaline was making my jaw tight. From the gallery, there was no applause. The Valori Chancellor's expression had shifted from polite amusement to something hard and flat and unreadable. The Dreth flagship's bioluminescent patterns were pulsing rapidly, their equivalent of alarm. The Grenchi delegation was clicking so fast that the translators could not keep up. Only the Ulshani gallery ship was still, and through the diplomatic channel, Nora picked up a single transmission from Tessara, meant only for us. 2 words, in perfectly accented English. "Keep going." There was a brief intermission between the 3rd and 4th tests. I used it to check the scoring display and confirm what I already knew. The Resolute was at the top of the board. All-time records in accuracy and rate of engagement. Near record in yield. Numbers that had not been seen from any species in centuries. And I had 2 tests left. My console chimed. A tight beam message from Admiral Ashworth, routed through our secure relay. I opened it. 2 words. "Sophie. Easy." I read it. Read it again. Closed the channel. I did not reply. I sat there in the brief silence between tests and felt the weight of the moment settling over me. I could stop here. I could coast through the remaining tests, put in a competent but unremarkable performance, and still walk away with scores that would impress the Council. That was what the Admiral wanted. That was what diplomacy demanded. That was the smart, safe, responsible thing to do. But I kept thinking about Tessara's warning. The acceptable range is mediocrity. The Council did not want us to succeed. They wanted us to perform well enough to feel good about ourselves, and then go home, content with our modest achievement, while the 12 maintained their comfortable dominance. I thought about my grandfather standing at that bulkhead door. I thought about 7 rejected petitions. I thought about every alien diplomat who had smiled at us and called us energetic and promising, and full of potential, as if we were children who might someday grow up to be real civilizations. I made a decision. I turned to Ethan, and I said the words that I knew would change everything. "Ethan, log this. I am choosing to exceed mission parameters." He stared at me. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he would argue. I thought he would remind me of the Admiral's orders, of the consequences, of everything that could go wrong. Instead, he sat down at his console, entered his authorization code, and logged my statement into the official record. "Logged, Commander," he said quietly. "For whatever it is worth, I think you are making the right call." "We will find out," I said. The fourth test signal sounded. I turned back to my console, and the Resolute moved toward the firing line. The fourth test was defensive countermeasures, and it was designed to break ships. The protocol was straightforward. The Resolute would position itself in the center of the proving ground, and the Council's automated attack systems would launch waves of assault drones and guided munitions at the ship from every direction. The scoring was based on survival time and damage mitigation. The longer the ship lasted, the higher the score. The less damage it took, the better. The record was 7 minutes and 42 seconds of sustained bombardment before cumulative damage exceeded the acceptable threshold. That record was held by the Dreth Collective, whose bioships could regenerate hull damage in real time. It was considered the most technically demanding record on the board, because it was not about how well you could shoot. It was about how well you could survive. Every other species that had taken this test had done the same thing. They had raised their shields, activated their defensive systems, and tried to endure the bombardment for as long as possible. Turtle up and take the hits. That was the conventional wisdom. That was how you survived. I had a different idea. "Daniel," I said, "plot an aggressive forward approach into the bombardment zone. I want the Resolute moving, not sitting." He looked at me like I had just asked him to fly into a sun. "Forward? Into the incoming fire?" "Full combat speed. Evasive pattern Theta 7. Modified for three-dimensional engagement. I want this ship dancing." "Commander," Ethan said from his station, "conventional doctrine for this test is static defense." "I am aware of conventional doctrine," I said. "I am also aware that conventional doctrine gets you 7 minutes and 42 seconds. I want more." Nobody argued further. They trusted me. Or they were too committed to turn back now. Either way, the Resolute surged forward as the Council's attack systems opened fire. The first wave hit us like a storm. Hundreds of guided projectiles, energy bolts, and drone-launched warheads converging on our position from every angle. The sky lit up with incoming fire, and the tactical display went red. But we were not where the fire expected us to be. Daniel threw the Resolute into evasive maneuvers that would have ripped a lesser ship apart. The inertial dampeners screamed, the hull groaned, but the ship moved, sliding through the gaps between incoming projectiles like a boxer slipping punches. And while Daniel dodged, I shot. I used the point defense grid not just defensively but offensively, destroying incoming munitions before they reached us, clearing corridors through the barrage so that Daniel could fly through them. At the same time, Katie ran the electronic warfare suite at full power, jamming targeting systems, deploying decoy signatures, and filling the airspace with so much false data that half the incoming fire went wide. Nora coordinated the chaff screens and countermeasure drones, launching them in precise patterns that created windows of clear space for Daniel to exploit. It was not a defense. It was a fight. The Resolute was not hiding behind its shields. It was charging into the bombardment and tearing it apart from the inside. 3 minutes. The ship had taken negligible damage. A few minor impacts on the forward armor, easily absorbed. 5 minutes. Still fighting. Still moving. Still alive. 7 minutes. The threshold time. The record. The hull was holding. The shields were at 80%. The point defense grid was running hot but functional. 7 minutes 42 seconds. Magistrate announced. Record matched. "Keep going," I said. 8 minutes. 9 minutes. 10 minutes. The Council's attack systems were escalating, throwing more and more firepower at us, but Daniel was flying the Resolute like a man possessed, and I was shooting faster than I had ever shot in my life, and Katie was running the electronic warfare suite so aggressively that half the incoming drones were attacking each other instead of us. 12 minutes. 14 minutes. And then something wonderful happened. The attack stopped. Not because the Council ended the test, Not because the council ended the test. Not because we had hit a time limit. The attack stopped because the council's automated systems ran out of ammunition. They had expended their entire arsenal, the full bombardment package designed to test the defensive capabilities of any warship in the galaxy. And the Resolute was still here. Still combat operational. Still functional. Still moving. The ship had outlasted the test. The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before. This was not surprise or disbelief. This was something deeper. This was the moment when every observer in the Thaline expanse realized that they were not watching a promising young species perform an impressive demonstration. They were watching something that fundamentally changed the way they understood the balance of power in the galaxy. Test concluded, the scoring system announced, and I heard a note in its automated voice that might have been confusion, as if the system was not sure how to score a result that did not fit any of its categories. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline. I had been in combat before, real combat with real consequences, and this was the same feeling. The fire in the blood, the electric clarity, the sense that every nerve in your body was alive and singing. I hid my hands under the console so nobody could see them trembling. A weapons officer does not tremble, especially not when the galaxy is watching. The fifth and final test was adaptive targeting. This was the prestige event, the one that separated good weapons officers from great ones. A series of unknown targets would be deployed, each one with randomized shielding frequencies, unpredictable movement patterns, and active electronic countermeasures. No species could prepare for them because they were different every time. The test measured reaction time, adaptation speed, and kill efficiency, how quickly you could figure out a target's defenses and destroy it. The record was held by the Dreth Collective, an adaptation efficiency rating of 94.2%. It was considered one of the most impressive individual performance records in Council history, because it measured not just technology but the operator, the mind behind the weapons. Magistrate, I said, feed me raw data. No pre-processed targeting solutions. No AI filtering. Raw sensor input on my primary display. The AI paused, which was unusual because AIs do not pause. Commander, processing unfiltered sensor data at the speeds required for this test exceeds recommended human cognitive parameters. I am aware of the recommended parameters. Acknowledged. Raw data on your display. Ethan looked at me. Sophie, that is a tremendous amount of information to process without computer assistance. No human being has ever done this test on raw data. Then no human being has ever done this test properly, I said. The AI filters introduce a processing delay of 0.3 seconds per target. That is an eternity in adaptive targeting. I need the data clean, and I need it fast. And if you cannot process it fast enough, then I will miss, and everyone will know, and the Admiral will have every reason to reprimand me. I met his eyes, but I am not going to miss. The test began. Targets appeared on my display, each one different, each one a puzzle. Shield frequency, movement pattern, countermeasure type. I had to read each target's defenses in real time, select the right weapon, adjust the right frequency, calculate the right approach, and fire, all within seconds. The data flooded my screen. Numbers and waveforms and trajectory calculations. More information than any human should have been able to process without computer assistance. But I was not just any human. I was a weapons officer, with 7 records and 3 combat tours, and 20 years of training, and I had spent every one of those years learning how to read a targeting display the way other people read a face. I fired. The first target's shields were oscillating at a high frequency. I matched the frequency on my railgun's magnetic containment, fired a resonance-tuned slug, and watched the target come apart. The second target was moving in an erratic pattern designed to prevent lock-on. I did not try to lock on. I predicted where it would be based on the pattern's underlying logic, fired ahead of it, and let it fly into the shot. The third target deployed active countermeasures, jamming signals that tried to blind my sensors. I switched to passive targeting, using the target's own emissions as a guide, and killed it with a single pulse laser shot. I was not thinking anymore. I was reacting, Years of training had built pathways in my mind that did not need conscious thought to function. The data came in, and the solutions came out, and my hands moved on the console with a precision that felt like music. Target after target fell. The scoring system updated in real time on every gallery display in the system. 90%, 92%, 94%. The Dreth record matched. I kept going. 95%, 96, 97. My hands were flying across the console. The data was a river, and I was swimming in it, not fighting the current, but moving with it, letting it carry me where I needed to go. 98%, 99. One target remained. It was the hardest one, shielded, countermeasured, and moving in a pattern that seemed almost intelligent. I read its defenses, calculated the approach, selected the weapon, adjusted the frequency. I fired. The target began to self-destruct before my shot arrived, a fail-safe built into the test protocol, designed to deny a perfect score by destroying the target before it could be killed. My shot arrived anyway. It hit the target at the exact moment of self-destruct, blasting through the expanding debris and vaporizing what was left. Adaptive targeting complete, Magistrate announced. Efficiency rating, 99.7%. One target scored as self-destructed prior to impact. Shot trajectory analysis confirms the commander's round would have achieved destruction. 99.7%. The highest adaptive targeting score ever recorded by any species in the 4,000-year history of the Council's proving grounds. The bridge was silent. Then Katie Marsh, who was not the kind of person who showed emotion in professional settings, put her head down on her console and said, "I cannot believe that just happened." Daniel Frost turned to look at me. "You just operated at a cognitive speed that should not be possible for a human being." "It is possible," I said. "It just takes practice." From the gallery, there was a sound that I had never heard before. A low, resonant hum, rising from the Ulshani delegation's ship, their species equivalent of a standing ovation. Slowly, the Grenshi joined in, their mandibles clicking in rapid approval. Other minor species added their own forms of applause, building into a wave of sound that filled the expanse. The Velori did not applaud, neither did the Dreth. On the scoreboard, displayed on every screen in the system, humanity's name sat at the top of 4 out of 5 categories, with all-time records in 3. The Resolute, a mid-range human cruiser, not a flagship, not a battleship, not even the most advanced ship in Earth's fleet, had outperformed warships 10 times its size, from civilizations 100 times its age. Chancellor Sovreth Kael Thon addressed the assembly. His voice was steady, his words carefully chosen. "We congratulate the human delegation on an unexpectedly vigorous performance," he said. "The results will be reviewed for procedural compliance before they are formally entered into the record." A political move, an attempt to delay, to diminish, to reframe what had just happened as an anomaly, rather than a revelation. I did not care. I had not come here for politics. I had come here to shoot, and I had shot. My console chimed again. A message from Admiral Ashworth. I opened it. 14 unread messages, each one progressively shorter and more terse. The last one said, "You just made my job either very easy or very hard. Report when you dock." I closed the channel. Then I noticed something on the long-range sensors that wiped the satisfaction off my face in an instant. The Velori war fleet, the 40 ceremonial ships that had arrived in perfect parade formation. They were moving, quietly, without announcement, without any change in their public communications. The Velori fleet was repositioning from parade formation into something very different. A battle line. 40 warships, each one 3 times the size of the Resolute, spreading into an arc that covered every exit vector from the proving ground. It was not an attack, not yet, but it was a message. I turned to Ethan. My voice was calm, because calm was all I had left to give. "Ethan, get me a line to the Admiral, and spin up the point defense grid, quietly." He looked at the tactical display. He saw what I saw. and for the first time in the 3 years I had served with him, I saw something in his eyes that looked like genuine concern. "Understood, Commander," he said, quietly. The Resolute hummed around us, steady and strong, while the galaxy held its breath. The minutes after the demonstration were the longest of my life. I sat at my console and watched the tactical display, where 40 Valori warships were settling into a formation that I recognized from War College textbooks. It was called a containment arc, a defensive posture that could transition to offensive action within seconds. Every gun on every ship was pointed at nothing, but the geometry was unmistakable. If the order came, they could bring all of their firepower to bear on the Resolute and our 2 escort frigates in under 3 seconds. I had just broken 3 galactic records, and now I might have broken something else entirely. Ethan had the Admiral on a secure channel within 2 minutes. Ashworth's voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man who was solving 10 problems simultaneously and did not have time to be angry yet. "I see the Valori repositioning," he said. "Our intelligence assets are monitoring. Do not, I repeat, do not power up any weapons systems beyond standard point defense. If they see your railguns charging, this goes from a diplomatic incident to a shooting war in about 4 seconds." "Understood, sir." "What about our escort frigates?" "The Steadfast and the Clarity are to maintain current positions. Do not cluster. Do not present a formation that looks like you are preparing for combat. You are a delegation, not a battle group, and right now that distinction is the only thing keeping the Valori from making a decision that nobody can walk back. And if they make that decision anyway?" There was a pause, a long one. "Then you fight, Sophie, and God help us all." The channel closed. I looked at Ethan, who had heard every word. "Get the crew to general readiness," I said quietly. "No alarms, no announcements. Just make sure everyone knows where their battle stations are." "Already done," he said. I started the moment the Valori broke formation. I could have hugged him, but we were both too tense to do anything except stare at the tactical display and wait for the galaxy to decide whether it was going to collapse into chaos. The next hour was a masterclass in controlled panic. On the surface, nothing happened. Ships held their positions. Communications channels buzzed with routine diplomatic chatter. The scoring displays continued to show humanity's results, blinking gently as if they were just numbers and not the fuse on the largest powder keg in galactic history. But beneath the surface, everything was moving. The Dreth Collective's bioship was pulsing faster, its rhythmic glow accelerating to a rate that I now knew indicated weapons priming. The Dreth were not allies of the Valori, but they were not allies of humanity either. They were calculating, as they always did, trying to determine which side of this confrontation would benefit them most. The Grenshi hive carrier had recalled all of its smaller craft, pulling them back into the central bay. A defensive posture. They wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. The Olvani observation ship had gone dark, its crystal hull dimming to near invisibility. The Olvani were pacifists by cultural inclination, but they were also pragmatists who understood that visibility in a conflict zone was an invitation. And the Olshani, Tessara's people, their diplomatic cruiser had not moved. It sat exactly where it had been throughout the demonstration, its hull pattern still shifting through calm blues and greens, as if nothing unusual was happening. I watched that ship and wondered what was going on behind those shifting patterns. "Commander," Nora said from her communication station, "I am monitoring a significant increase in encrypted traffic between the Valori flagship and 3 of their client species delegations. The encryption is military grade. I cannot break it, but the volume alone suggests coordination." "They are deciding," Ethan said. "Deciding what? Whether we are a threat that can be managed, or a threat that needs to be eliminated before we get any stronger." I let that thought settle. It was not a comfortable one. I had known, when I decided to exceed my mission parameters, that there would be consequences, but I had been thinking about political consequences. Diplomatic censure, maybe a reassignment. Not this. Not 40 warships pointed at my crew. For a moment, a terrible, cold moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake, if my pride, my frustration, my desire to prove that humanity was more than the galaxy's polite little newcomers, had just put my crew and my species in danger. Then I looked at Katie Marsh, who was monitoring the point defense grid with steady hands and clear eyes. At Daniel Frost, who sat at his helm console with the calm patience of a man who had already planned 6 different escape routes and was working on a 7th. At Nora Beckett, who was tracking every signal in the system with the focus of a predator watching a herd. These people trusted me, and they had earned the right to be trusted in return. Whatever happens, I said, I want you all to know that I am proud of what we did today. Every shot, every maneuver, every decision. We showed them who we are. And who are we, Commander? Katie asked, looking up from her console. We are the people who do not back down, I said. And we are the people who do not start fights we cannot finish. The tension held. Minute after agonizing minute, the Valori fleet maintained its battle line, and the Resolute sat in the proving ground, like a stone in a river, letting the current flow around it. And then Tessara made her move. It came without warning. The Ul Shani diplomatic cruiser opened a public channel, a broadcast transmitted on every frequency to every ship in the Thaleen expanse. Not encrypted, not private, public, so that every species present could hear it, and more importantly, so that every species present could witness it. Tessara's voice filled the communications array, clear and formal, and carrying the weight of ancient authority. This is Envoy Tessara of the Ul Shiani Concord, speaking under the right of witness as established in the founding charter of the Council of 12. I hereby formally declare that the demonstration provided by the human delegation has been conducted within all established protocols. The results are legitimate, the records are valid, the performance has been witnessed by the Ul Shani Concord, and is so attested. She paused, and then she added, in a voice that was quieter but somehow harder, any action taken against the human delegation in response to their lawful and protocol-compliant performance would constitute an act of aggression against a witnessed party, in direct violation of Council Charter. The Ul Shani Concord would be obligated to respond accordingly. The channel remained open for 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then it closed. I stared at my display. Nora stared at hers. Ethan stared at the overhead, where the tactical display showed 40 Valori warships that had just been told, in front of the entire galaxy, that attacking us would mean attacking the Ul Shani as well. She just put her entire species between us and the Valori fleet, Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. That is either the bravest or the most insane diplomatic move I have ever seen. It is both, Ethan said, and it is also brilliant. The right of witness was an ancient provision, one of the oldest in the Council's charter. When a species formally witnessed and attested to an event, any attack on the participants became an attack on the witnessing species as well. It was a diplomatic shield, a guarantee of safe passage rooted in the oldest traditions of interstellar law. It was fragile. It could be challenged. It could be argued. But it could not be ignored. Not publicly. Not with every species in the expanse listening. The Valori fleet held its position for another 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which I did not blink, did not move, did not breathe any more than I absolutely had to. Then, slowly, like a tide withdrawing from a shore, the 40 ships began to move, back into parade formation, back into ceremonial positions. Guns still armed, I was certain, but no longer pointed in our direction with obvious intent. The moment passed. The galaxy decided not to end. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for a year. Stand down from general readiness, I said. Normal operations. And, Nora, open a private channel to the Ul Shani diplomatic cruiser. I want to thank Envoy Tessara. Already open, Commander. She is waiting. I picked up the communicator. Envoy Tessara, I owe you more than I know how to express. Her voice came back, warm and slightly amused. You owe me nothing, Commander. What you did today was remarkable. What I did was merely necessary. You put your species at risk for us. I put my species on the right side of history. That is never a risk. It is an investment. I wanted to say more, but she spoke again before I could. Commander, you should know. There will be a closed council session within the hour to vote on humanity's petition for elevated status. I cannot tell you the outcome, but I can tell you this. 3 hours ago, you had perhaps 2 votes in your favor. Now you have more. What you did on that proving ground did not just break records, it broke assumptions. And sometimes that is more valuable than any weapon. The council session happened behind closed doors, in a chamber aboard the Valori flagship where no human representative was allowed to enter. I did not learn the details until days later, through diplomatic channels and intelligence reports and a long, carefully worded message from Tessera. The vote was 7-5. 7 in favor, 5 against. Humanity was granted provisional Tier 2 recognition by the Council of 12. Not a full seat, not equal standing, but a significant elevation that granted us military autonomy, trade privileges, and the right to establish defensive installations beyond our home systems. The 5 dissenting votes were the Valori, the Dreth, and 3 of their client species. The fracture in the council that my demonstration had exposed was now visible to everyone. The old order was shifting, and not everyone was happy about it. But 7-5 was 7-5. We had won. When the news reached the Resolute, the crew celebrated in the quiet, disciplined way that military crews celebrate when they are still technically on duty in potentially hostile space. There were handshakes and tight smiles and a few tears from people who understood what this meant, not just for the crew, but for every human being who had ever looked up at the stars and been told that they were not ready to stand among them. I did not celebrate. Not yet. I had one more call to make. Admiral Ashworth's face appeared on my secure display, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in 5 hours, but his eyes were sharp, and when he finally spoke, his voice was steady. You disobeyed a direct order, Commander. Yes, sir. You exceeded your mission parameters against explicit instructions. Yes, sir. You nearly triggered an interstellar incident that could have resulted in the destruction of your ship, your crew, and possibly the beginning of a war that humanity is not yet ready to fight. Yes, sir. He paused. The silence stretched. I stood at attention and waited for the hammer to fall. You also just accomplished in one afternoon what 20 years of diplomacy failed to achieve. Another pause. I am placing a formal censure in your service record, right next to a classified commendation. The censure is for the record. The commendation is for the truth. Understood, sir. Do not do it again, Sophie. His voice softened, just slightly. Unless I tell you to. The call ended. I sat down in my quarters and stared at the blank screen for a long time. The days that followed were a blur of debriefings, diplomatic messages, and intelligence reports. News of the demonstration spread across the galaxy faster than any faster-than-light communication system could carry it, because rumor has always traveled faster than technology. Unaligned species, the dozens of civilizations that existed outside the Council's influence, began reaching out to Earth for military partnerships. They had been watching, and they had seen a young species demonstrate capabilities that rivaled the oldest powers in the galaxy. They wanted to know more. They wanted to know if humanity could protect them the way the Council had promised to but never truly had. The Valori responded the way ancient powers always respond when a new challenger emerges, quietly and dangerously. Intelligence reports indicated that they had doubled their border fleet strength along human-adjacent space within a week of the demonstration. They were not preparing for war, not yet, but they were preparing for the possibility of war, and in the calculus of interstellar relations, there is very little difference between the two. Arms analysts across a dozen species began revising their threat assessments. Humanity was no longer categorized as a regional concern or a developing military presence. We were reclassified as a peer-level strategic factor. 3 words that carried more weight than any weapon I had fired. I was reassigned from the Resolute 2 weeks after the demonstration. New orders from High Command, stamped with Admiral Ashworth's encryption key, assigning me to a program that I was not allowed to discuss. The paperwork described it as Strategic Capability Development. Ethan told me it was almost certainly a task force being assembled for the conflict that Ashworth believed was now inevitable. I packed my things and said goodbye to my crew. Katie Marsh, who shook my hand and told me that she had already named a calibration sequence after me. Daniel Frost, who said nothing but nodded once, which from him was the equivalent of a 20-minute speech. Nora Beckett, who hugged me and whispered, "Give them something to talk about, wherever they send you." And Ethan Blake, who walked me to the shuttle bay and stood with me in the airlock, looking out at the stars. "You know what you started," he said. It was not a question. I know. The Valori will not forget. The Dreth will not forget. This is not going to be a smooth road. It was never going to be smooth. At least now we are on the road, instead of standing at the gate, asking for permission to walk. He smiled. It was a rare thing, an Ethan Blake smile, and I treasured it. "Watch your back out there, Sophie. Watch the Resolute for me." I boarded the shuttle and left the ship that had been my home for 3 years. Through the viewport, I watched the Resolute grow smaller, a dark shape against the stars, angular and tough, and entirely unimpressive by galactic standards. A mid-range cruiser. Nothing special to look at. But I knew what it could do. And now the galaxy knew too. 3 days later, I received a message from Tessara. It was brief, personal, and written in English, rather than translated from Ulshani, which told me she had taken the time to compose it herself. "Commander Grant, I wanted you to know that the Council is still debating the implications of your demonstration. Some are calling it a watershed moment. Others are calling it a provocation. Both are correct. You understand, I hope, that this changes everything. The galaxy will never see your species the same way again. Some will admire you. Some will seek to destroy you before you grow any stronger. You have opened a door that cannot be closed. I do not say this to frighten you. I say it because you have earned the right to understand exactly what you have done. The Ulshani will stand with humanity in the days ahead, not because we are obligated to, because we choose to, and because we have learned, over 4,000 years, that the species worth standing with are the ones who refuse to be less than they are. I look forward to working with you again, Tessara." I read the message 3 times. Then I saved it and closed my console. That night, I sat alone in my temporary quarters on a transit station between assignments, looking out the viewport at the vast, ancient, dangerous galaxy that now knew exactly what humanity was capable of. I held my grandfather's old pistol in my hands, feeling the weight of steel and history, and I thought about what it meant to be a species that was no longer invisible. I was proud of my crew, proud of my ship, proud of the shots I had taken and the records I had broken, proud that when the moment came, I had chosen to show the galaxy the truth instead of the comfortable lie that everyone expected. But I was also aware, in a way that I had not been before the demonstration, that excellence has a cost. The galaxy had been comfortable with humanity as a minor curiosity, a loud little species with interesting technology and no real power. That comfort was gone now. In its place was something sharper and more dangerous. Attention, scrutiny, and for some, fear. Frightened empires do terrible things. That is not a human lesson. It is a universal one. But so do brave ones. And if I had learned anything from standing at that weapons console, from watching 500 drones dissolve into dust, from processing targeting data faster than any human should have been able to, from feeling the Resolute hum beneath me like a living thing that wanted to run and fight and prove itself, it was this. Humanity had been underestimated for 214 years. We had been talked down to, dismissed, denied, patronized, and placed in a category that said we were not ready, not mature, not worthy of a place among the stars. And in one afternoon, with one ship, one crew, and one weapons officer who decided that enough was enough, we had proven them all wrong. They had asked for a demonstration. I gave them one. And now the galaxy watched us the way you watch a storm on the horizon. Not sure yet whether it would pass, or whether it would tear the sky apart. That was fine. Let them watch. We had been underestimated before. It was practically our species' superpower. right next to the other one, the one where we do not miss.